So let me just start screen sharing. All right, can you see my screen? I'm gonna assume it as can.
Yeah.
So today's lesson is gonna be about loops. So um, sorry, yeah. So we start off with what is a loop. So a loop is a really basic structure. You're gonna see it in every single coding language. So a loop is a coding structure that repeatedly executes a block of code as long as a specified condition is true or until it iterates over a sequence of elements. So loops are essential when you need to perform the same action multiple times without having to write a repetitive code. So basically, in simple words, a loop is basically it just makes your coding easier. So let's say if you need to execute a code like 100 times, you wouldn't want to type it out 100 times. You just do a loop for it. So it just makes it a lot easier. Or if there's a specific condition, like you want to run a code until a specific condition is met, you use a loop. So today we're going to learn about two types of loops. So one of them is a while loop, which has a condition. So the loop continues running as long as a given condition remains true. And the other one is a for loop, which is used to iterate over a sequence, like a list, range, or a range of numbers or characters in a string. Both of these are pretty simple, so you guys shouldn't have too much of a problem understanding this. So while loop. So while loop repeatedly executes a block of code as long as the condition is true. So as long as the condition is true, it's gonna repeatedly execute whatever's inside the loop. So
हाँ ना मोकलीश ना मोकलीश
okay. So the example here we have is we have established a variable called count and we have initialized it with the value of 1. And we have a while loop here with the condition that as long as count is less than equal to 5, it will print out the variable count. And at the end, it would add 1 to count. So what this basically means is that the loop is going to keep running as long as the count variable doesn't isn't more than 5. So as you can see, it keeps adding 1 to it every time. So basically, this loop is going to run 5 times and it's going to print 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And on its fifth attempt, when you add 1 to it, it becomes 6. So this condition is false and it exits the loop. So what you might have noticed is if you've done a different if you know a different programming language, you'd see there's no parentheses because Python loops work differently. So in Python, indentation is critical because it defines the structure and the flow of code. Unlike some other programming languages that use braces or keywords like begin and end to define code blocks, Python uses indentation, spaces or tabs, to group elements and show hierarchy, especially in control structures like loops. When you write a loop in Python, the block of code that belongs to the loop must be indented. This indentation tells us that tells Python which statements are part of the loop and which should be executed repeatedly. So that's quite a mouthful. So basically, I'll explain it in simple terms. So indentation, like in Python, indentation is what tells the compiler what's inside the loop and what isn't. So in C++ plus plus and Java, if you know those languages, indentation is basically just for readability. But in Python, it's actually important to have good indentation because it could affect your code. So over here, you see there's the space where you write while and there's the space over here before you print and count. That's basically the indentation part. It's what tells Python that this is the code that needs to be executed and is a part of the loop. So if I were to write something over here with no space, that means it's outside the loop and it wouldn't execute that repeatedly. So over here, there's an example. So again, it's basically what I said. So this is the start of the while loop. This line is indented, so it's a part of the loop. So is this one. But if I were to write something over here at the end, it wouldn't be a part of the loop. Also, a quick note, in Python, comments are preceded by hashes rather than the backslash you use in like C++ plus plus and Java. So that's something you should know because it helps in group large projects. So if you're just trying to keep a note for yourself. Okay, let's go over rules for indentation real quick. You just, as long as you have a basic knowledge of this, you don't have to memorize these rules, but it's just good to know about them. So indentation is mandatory, of course. Unlike C++ plus plus and Java, where it was optional, indentation in Python is definitely mandatory. So all code within a loop must be indented. Otherwise, the compiler is going to get confused. It's going to think the loop is empty. So you should have everything indented within a loop. Oh, sorry. Consistent indentation. You must use the same number of spaces or tabs for each level of indentation. By convention, most Python uses four spaces for an indentation. So four spaces is basically a tab. So if you just press one tab, that's good enough. No mix of tabs and spaces. Python doesn't allow mixing of tabs and spaces for indentation. It will raise an indentation error. So you don't need to know about this error. You just need to know that whenever this error pops up, you're using a mix of tabs and spaces, there's something wrong with the indentation. So usually just try to stick to tabs or spaces. The convention is definitely tabs though, so I suggest just clicking tab once to indent your code. So we have a practice problem real quick. So I'll give you guys 5 minutes to solve this, and then we'll go over the solution. Let me know if you guys have any questions or anything later. All right, I think that's enough time. So were you guys able to solve it? Does anyone have any questions before we go over the solution? All right, I'm gonna assume no one has any questions. So here's the solution. So firstly, the problem is you have to write a while loop that prints numbers down from 1 to 10, from 10 to 1, sorry. So it goes 10, 9, 8, 7, just like that. So what you would do is first you initialize a variable with a value of 10. So over here we have said num equals 10. And then for while condition, you'd say as long as the number is greater than equal to 1, because we need it to stop at 1 and not continue on. So as long as the number is greater than equal to 1, you print out the number and then decrease the number by 1 every time. So as you can see over here, first it's going to print 10, then subtract 1 from it, so it becomes 9. So the while loop, so the condition here still stays true because 9 is greater than 1. So it's going to print 9 and then subtract 1 and become 8 and so on until the number reaches 1. So moving on, we could also do loops with user input in it. So for while loops with user input, so here's an example for it. So over here, we have initialized a string, like a string named password with nothing in it. And then we've given a condition for the while statement saying while password is not equal to Python 123, password equals input, enter the password. So what this basically means is the program is going to ask the user to enter the password and it's going to wait for an input. And whatever the user inputs is going to check if it's the correct password, which in this case is Python123. And if it is, it's going to say access granted. But if it isn't, then it's just going to keep asking the user for the password again and again until it gets it correct. So as you can see over here, so let's say if the user input is something like just Python, so that's obviously not Python 123, so it's going to ask it again. But if the user inputs Python 123, this condition is going to be false, so it exits the loop and prints access granted. So I have another practice problem for you guys. This is with the user input. So you have to write a while loop that asks the user to input numbers and adds them to a total. Stop the loop once the total reaches 100. So you can ask the user for an input and keep adding it until it reaches 100. And if you guys want an extra challenge, you can also print the total of the sum after the loop ends. So I'll give you guys 5 minutes for this one as well, because this is a little more tricky than the last one. So take your time, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask me.
Can you go to the last slide?
Sorry, the last slide?
Yeah.
Okay, here.
Can you go to the back slide, please? Thanks.
All right. Were you guys able to solve it, or do you need more time?
It's solved.
Sorry,
It is solved.
you solved it? Okay. All right. Let's go with the solution. You can check if you did correct. So in the solution, so first we initialize a variable called total and initialize a value of 0. And since we want it to stop when it reaches 100, we give the condition for the while loop while total is less than 100. And then we take the input from the user and store it in a different variable and then just add the variable to the total. And then it's going to go on and on until the total reaches 100, at which point it's going to exit the loop. And this is the bonus challenge. So it's going to print the total reached and it's going to print whatever the total was. So let's say in this case you inputted 50 the first time. So the total value becomes 50, but it's still less than 100. So it's going to ask the user to enter another number. So let's say you input like 51 this time. So the total becomes 101. And since that's greater than 100, it exits the loop and it's going to say the total reached 101. So I hope you guys understood that. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask me, or we can move on to for loops. So for loops iterates over a sequence like a list or a string or a range of numbers. So the basic syntax for for loop is for, then a variable name, then in sequence, and then the code of block. So in this case, a variable is a name that takes on each value in the sequence during each iteration of the loop. And the sequence is a collection of items that you want to loop through. So this might seem a little confusing right now, but hopefully it gets easier when we look at an example. So for our example here, we have a list basically called fruits, and it has the items apple, banana, and cherry in it. So this is a simple list, but the main thing we're learning here is the for loop part. So over here, for fruit. So as you looked here, the variable, so in this case, fruit is the variable here that's going to take each one of these as store each one of these values, and in fruits. So what this basically means is this variable is going to go over each one of these items and store them and then eventually print them. So if you were to run this, it'd be for fruit in fruits. So at first, the fruit is going to store the value apple in fruits and it's going to print apple. And then when it's going to run a second time, this time it's going to move on to the right and store banana, and it's going to print that. And then for the third time, it's going to store cherry and then print that. So if you were to run this program, you guys can try running it. It's going to print apple, banana, and then cherry. So that's how basically for loops work. They iterate over a list, or if you had a series of numbers instead of fruits or even colors or anything, that's how for loops work. So we have a simple practice problem here. So you have to write a for loop to print each element in the list of colors. So the list of the colors is given here. So you have red, green, blue, yellow. So it's basically this part of the code. And you just have to write a for loop like this that prints each one of these colors. So I'll give you another 5 minutes to work on this. It should be pretty easy. So I believe you guys can solve it. And let me know if you have any questions or if you want to look at this slide, because this is basically what you're gonna have to do.
Can you go back, like on the back side? Yeah, thanks.
All right, I hope you guys are able to solve it. Does anyone have any questions before we go over the solution?
No.
Okay, so let's go over the solution. So this is pretty simple as well. You just write the colors, make the list, and then for the coding part, it's basically just this, but with different variables. So far, and the color is the variable here, and colors is like the sequence. So and then you print colors, so it's gonna print red, green, blue, yellow. So I hope you guys were able to solve it. If you guys weren't, then I'd suggest you do more of the practice problems that we posted later today. Because loops are basically like a really important part of coding, so it's good that you should have like a strong understanding of loops. So in Python, you can also loop to a range. So what a range is basically a range from a number to another number. So over here, you can see for I, which is a variable in range. Now this range part, this is like a function. You don't need to know what functions are for now, but just know that it is a function. And you have two values here, 1 and then comma 6, and then print I. So what this does, this range function, it's going to print out numbers from between 1 and 6, but it does not include 6. So if you were to run this program, it would print 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's going to print all the numbers between 1 and 6, but it does not print 6. So you should keep that in mind, that the range function doesn't print the last number, but it does print the first one. So this is pretty simple too. So basically how a range works is, this is like a syntax for range, like this part. So you have range and then start, stop, and then step. So over here you can see there's no step part because that is optional, but this is the start and this is the, sorry. So this is the start and this is the stop. So it's gonna this is the start where it prints 1 and then it stops right before 6. So a range generates a sequence of numbers. So start is basically the first number that is included. Stop, which is like the second part after the comma, that's the upper limit. That's excluded. So over here you can see 6 was not printed. 6 would not be printed. Just print from 1 to 5. And step. Now this is, like I said, is optional. So it's the difference between each number. So the default is 1. So what this basically means is it's gonna say what the difference is between each number in the range. So over here, if it was 1 comma, let's say 11, or 1 comma, well, so it's gonna print numbers from 1 to 10. But if you added a step, and let's say you made that step 2, then that's gonna mean it's gonna print every other number. So 1, and then there's a difference of 2, so it's gonna print 1, 3, and so on. So that is good to know as well. So the difference, so it's basically how many numbers it skips, if you could think about it that way. So like an example here is, so the start is 0, which would be included. The end is 10, and the difference or the step is 2. So if you are to print this, it generates numbers starting from 0 up to 10, but not including 10, incrementing by 2. So the loop prints even numbers between 0 and 10. So as you can see, the output here is 0, and then it skips 1 and goes to 10 because the step is 2. So it's going to skip a number. So 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. And then 10 obviously wasn't included because it's the end. So, and the end part is never included. So keep that in mind, that the end part is always excluded, because I can see a lot of mistakes happening because of that. So yeah. So here we have a practice problem. So you have to write a loop that prints the first 10 numbers. So you don't need a step for this because by default a step is 1. So you can just choose not to write a step. And you just say the start and the end points, and then you just read the program. This is a pretty simple problem, but if you guys have any questions about it, let me know, or if you guys need more time later. I'll give you guys 5 minutes for this one. All right, so were you guys able to solve it, or do you guys need more time? All right, I'm gonna assume you guys are able to solve it. So I'm gonna go over the solution here real quick. So what you do is, since it asks for a loop that prints the first 10 numbers, so 10 is obviously included. But since in a range, the last number, this part, isn't included, so you have to so you have to set it as 0, comma 11 and then print it. So actually this should be 1, so that's a mistake. This should be 1 or 0. So it's gonna print 1 to numbers from 1 to 10. So this this was pretty easy. I hope you guys were able to solve it. If you guys weren't, then you can feel free to ask a question about it. Or we can move on to the second one, which is slightly more challenging. So I'll give you guys a little more time for this one. I'll give you guys like 8 minutes for this. So what you have to do is write a file that prints all even numbers from 1 to 20. So in this time you're gonna need a step, which is like the third number here. And since it's even, I'll tell you guys that the step needs to be 2. So I'll let you guys figure this out. And since it's harder, I'll give you guys like 8 minutes. So let me know if you guys have any questions.
Can you go on slide number 19? Yep. Can you do slide number 21?
All right, were you guys able to solve it, or do you guys need more time? All right, I'll just go over the solution real quick. So for the solution, you can have a for loop, but this time the range is 2 to 21, and then the difference is 2. So it's going to print all the even numbers from 2 to 20. So yeah, this is pretty simple once you see the code. But I understand if you guys aren't able to solve it, just do the practice problems that we posted shortly. And yeah, I think that is it for today's class. So if unless anyone has any questions, you guys can feel free to leave.
I have a question, but it's
Yeah,
off topic.
yeah.
On which time does the class started? Like every time?
It starts at 1 p.m. MST every Saturday.
Every time. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So unless anyone else has any questions, you guys can feel free to leave.
Hello.
Yeah.
Can you Gmail me all Google Slides?
Okay, yeah, we will email the lesson to this the video to this lesson and the slides maybe in a bit, but you'll have it. Don't worry. Anyone else have any questions? All right, then you guys can feel free to leave the class. Yeah.